recording at this stage.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for letting me know. I wouldn't have chatted away like that. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be with you. Thanks for joining us on a cold night. And something that you should know is that in the same year that Anshe Emet celebrates its 150th anniversary, Hillel is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2023. And what we should all know is that Hillel actually began in Illinois. And when a young rabbi by the name of Benjamin Frankel accepted a part-time position in Champaign, the University of Illinois, he said, "I'll take the job if you let me work with college students." And I don't have to rehearse with you the exponential growth that Hillel has undergone since those humble beginnings in 1923, but it is remarkable, and B'nai B'rith International certainly deserves a great amount of credit for its vision and the vision of its president at the time, Adolf Krauss, who said, "I believe that foundations such as those now existing at the University of Illinois and at the University of Wisconsin should be extended into all universities and schools for higher education in which suitable provisions is not made for Jewish students to encourage the cultivation of their Judaism." I've been doing this job for a while now, and so I can kind of reflect on conversations that we would have had with Hillel directors in years past. We would have spoken about the challenges of engaging college students, Jewish college students. We might have talked about the role of Chabad on campus and what Jewish students are interested in and how we can better capture their attention. But today there's another discussion that needs to be considered by parents and students alike. How do young people navigate the challenge of college life as identified Jews, as people who care about Israel, its safety, on those campuses where anti-Zionist rhetoric is pronounced? How do Jews express their Jewishness on college campuses when we are seeing such a rise in anti-Semitism? I am confident that Rabbi Frankel would be stunned by how much the world has changed since he started the first Hillel in 1923. The question that we're going to be focusing on is, what's the role of Hillel today? We at Anshe Emet have made this a focus in our Standing Up to Hate series. Last week, we had the honor of speaking with Rose Reich and Blake Flayton. And we are fortunate tonight to have some of the most innovative Hillel directors in the country with us to focus on the subject of a Hillel Roundtable, Anti-Semitism on campuses and the response from Hillels around the country. And it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Noam Bentov, who joins us from Johns Hopkins University, Erez Cohen from the University of Illinois, Rabbi Lerner from UCLA, Tilly Shemer from University of Michigan, and Weil from the University of Central Florida. Welcome all, and thank you so much for making time for us. I'm going to avoid asking either of the Aarons what the temperature's like in their neighborhoods, but it's a little different here in Chicago, and I imagine in Michigan as well. So let's begin. Can we go around? I'm just going to go around on how I see the people on my Zoom screen, but can you give us an approximation of the number of Jewish students you have on your campus, how long you've been a Hillel director, and maybe a little bit about the changes that you've seen since you've begun? So Erez, I'm going to begin with you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Siegel, for having us here today. And thank you everyone for joining. My name is Erez Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of Hillel at the University of Illinois. We serve roughly 3,500 Jewish students, graduate and undergraduate students at the University of Illinois. And I have been on campus for 10 years now, 7 and plus change of them as a director. And prior to that, I was the Shaliach or Israel Fellow on campus. I did so poorly that I got booted up to a different role. And for us, I mean, speaking as someone who was a Shaliach, the temperature on campus, not talking weather-wise, has increased immensely over the past 10 years. We're talking about a switch from dealing with just the every now and then anti-Israel program on campus, a single event, or maybe Apartheid Week, which happened when I was a Shaliach, to now having every single semester a BDS campaign on our campus, to the point that our students ended up filing a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education. So a federal complaint that the university is dealing with at this point when it comes to anti-Semitism on our campus.
Tilly, tell us a little bit about University of Michigan Hillel and a little bit about you.
Sure, happy to, and thank you so much for including me. I'll start with saying I love Hillel work. I feel lucky every day to be the executive director of University of Michigan Hillel. That hasn't changed since my early days in Hillel. I've been with Hillel for 18 years now. I started with Hillel of Greater Toronto, came to Michigan in 2008, thought I'd be here for a year or two, and Ann Arbor just pulls you in. And I've been executive director here for the last 9 years. In terms of numbers, we have 5,000 Jewish undergrads, probably another 1,500 Jewish grad students. But I don't think that really gives the full picture of the vibrancy of Jewish life and just how many ways in which we're thinking about where the students are and how we can help them connect to Jewish life in ways that are really meaningful for them. And I think what's changed most about Hillel, especially thinking about the early days, I think that Hillel at that time in 2003 was a lot of students coming to us for their needs. And over time, I feel like Hillel has really decentralized as an organization, and whether it's the diversity of groups that students can participate in Hillel, or now this combination of coming to Hillel for programs and Hillel coming to you for programs, and now doing programs in the homes. And that has been in particular important to us this year, where the only way in which we're able to do Hillel programming and bring Jewish life to campus is through students' homes directly. So that's one of the big changes that we've seen, is how we can enrich students' experiences even in their own homes.
So we should change it to Hillel DIY, right? Do-it-yourself Judaism.
Yes, I think that there is a lot of empowering students to do it themselves and to invite their peers to do it with them. And I think that has made us even more successful at being able to reach the broad numbers of Jewish students on our campus.
Thanks, Tilly. Noam, how long have you been at Johns Hopkins?
Hello, thank you, Rabbi Siegel. So this is my 4th year at Johns Hopkins Hillel. I believe I'm the only one representing a private university and the smallest university here. We have an undergraduate population of 6,200 students and about 450 Jews on campus. And we predominantly serve the undergraduate population. And in addition, we have a few other smaller campuses like Peabody Institute and MICA, which is the Maryland Institute of Arts. And then similarly to Erez, I also started as a Shaliach. I was at the University of Florida, much bigger school. Different challenges. I was there as a Shaliach during the days of the Second Intifada, so from 2004 to 2006. But at Johns Hopkins and in Baltimore, I've been for 4 years. I'd agree with the changes that Erez and Tilly mentioned. I should also mention, just as a comparison, the impact that social media has had on our students And what I see is, the days, I still remember sitting in my office as an Israel fellow in 2004, and somebody was telling me about the Facebook. And I had no idea why it's good or why not good, but what's the point? Fast forward 17 years later, I think in today the interaction, the conversations are all around social media. So that was a major shift in the way we work and the way we interact with our students. And I'll pause here. I hope I addressed everything, but I'm happy, to continue the conversation.
Yeah. So much of your work is through social media, and as a Hillel director, you have to be social media savvy in order really to do your job well.
Or to hire people that are better equipped to handle the challenges of social media. I'm not an expert.
I can totally relate to that. Thank you. We appreciate that. Aaron Weil, tell us about UCF.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I've been here, I'm in my 8th year. Tilly and I think we started around the same time because I was 10 years in Pittsburgh for Carnegie Mellon and Pitt, and I've been here, I'm in my 8th year. So UCF is a strange school, founded in 1963, first graduating class 1968, and yet it's the largest undergraduate institution in the country with about 72,000 students. We have a little over 6,000 Jewish students, which makes us the 3rd largest Jewish population in the country. But a very, very different kind of a school than what Tilly was talking about at Michigan or even Maryland, where you find, 30 to 50 different Jewish organizations on campus. Here, it's a lot. We're more of in a growth mode. Literally, the Hillel got relaunched in 2013. It was officially launched in 2001, but fell on itself in 2008. So we relaunched it in 2013. And in the last 7 years, we've gone from the smallest Hillel in Florida to the largest Hillel. There's 9 Hillels here in Florida. And I think part of the reason we were able to do that, believe it or not, was the lack of anti-Semitism. We've really been blessed with a very quiet period where we've been able to get a lot done. Of course, being in Pittsburgh, I had the opportunity to get acquainted with anti-Semitism. But what we have here in Florida is very, very different. And it's allowed us to do things that probably couldn't be done in other places because of that. Right now, we're opening up a new restaurant in our Hillel. We're working with the Muslim community that will be under halal certification as well as kosher certification. We have the student government at UCF in the last month just passed a resolution. It went through 3 readings. 100% of the student government voted in favor of asking the university president to accept the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. And the only reason that the president hasn't come out with a public statement is he called and told me, he says, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it until I've done the policy change. The student government has asked me to implement policies that allow Jews to be treated the same as other minority groups on campus, and they should be. We make sure that Black students, Latino students, LGBTQ are protected, but Jews aren't protected. So I'm going to change the policy, and then we're going to make a public announcement. So it's a unique opportunity that we have to get ready for, I think, what is coming. And then, spoiler alert, I'll also tell you that while I understand the topic is anti-Semitism, I might be the naysayer here in believing that anti-Semitism on college campuses is, in my book, just my opinion, is not the greatest threat that Jewish college students are facing today. I think that assimilation continues to be a far larger and far graver challenge that we're facing as Hillel directors than anti-Semitism.
Let's come back to that. And I appreciate, Aaron, that you're getting the issues out there, and we'll be able to kind of have that conversation. But let's find out a little bit about life at UCLA before we get to that.
Yeah,
what do you think, Aaron?
Thanks. Thank you so much for having us. I started here in 2012, and I would say that one of the changes that I've witnessed over the last 9 years is, in 2012, people who were on social media were often talking about 10 or 15 campuses. They'd come out with these the lists of the worst, campuses that are out there. And I kind of said to myself, give it a couple of years, because in a few years, everybody's going to be talking about every place. And for those of us who were sort of the early adopters, Columbia, some of the West Coast campuses, et cetera, where you had very, well-organized and loud pro-Palestinian, students on campus pushing initiatives, it was clear to us that they were sort of trying them out on, test campuses, and then whatever they thought, they could take to other campuses was going to be scaled out by, the Students for Justice in Palestine nationally, which happened, right? So now people are actually less interested in, I say UCLA and nobody goes, oh, UCLA. Now they say like, oh, UCLA, I'd love for my kids to go there, right? And I think that, to kind of add to Aaron's observation, it's the best of times and the worst of times. Right, we have incredible, never before seen Jewish life on all of the campuses that you see here, but really most of the campuses in the country, today, and it's vibrant. And then you've got the stuff like you heard about last week with Rose, and Blake, and incidents that happen. And I think, just to bookmark it, I think we should talk about the disconnect between what it's like to actually be on campus 365 days a year. And what it's like to continue to hear from people about stuff that that happened back in 2014, 2015 in a room with 8 students that happened to get covered by the New York Times. But like, if you had asked most UCLA students, of which there's 35,000, 3,000 of them Jews, 500 or 600 undergraduates, they have no idea what you're talking about.
So one of the things that we're going to try and balance today is what we hear in the news media and in the kind of Jewish conversations across the country, and what you're actually seeing in real time on campuses. I really appreciate it. So let's kind of dive in, because what we're looking at is that Hillel measured 178 anti-Semitic incidents this past academic year on North American campuses that it serves, which is an all-time high. Even, again, let's underscore, even during COVID, when some of the campuses are being closed. Online harassment of Jewish students and anti-Semitic vandalism has continued in recent months. The ADL has reported that anti-Semitic hate crimes and bias incidents on college campuses more than tripled between 2012 and 2019. So before we talk about the reality of, or what you think is the bigger picture, let's focus on this for a minute. Does this reflect what you see on your campuses? So Noam, let's start with you. Does this a reflection? And by the way, instead of me calling on you, I would really love it if you guys would just respond and ask each other questions as well, because you're the experts, and I'm happy to move this along, but I want a freer flow of the discussion. And let me just tell the people who are watching that the chat is shut down, but if you do want to ask a question, look at the Q&A, and we'll be watching the Q&A, and we'll try and get your questions in as well. But go ahead, Noam.
Yes, thank you. It definitely resonates with me, and unfortunately, in the past 3 months, at Johns Hopkins, we had 2 very different incidents of bias and anti-Semitism that, it's not a secret, they at least one of them made it to national news. So I should just mention a TA at Johns Hopkins allegedly posted a series of racist and, in my view, anti-Semitic and definitely anti-Zionist tweets, including a poll where that TA is asking if she should penalize students due to their Zionist beliefs and criticizing birthright and so on and so forth. The information is available online. I'm not revealing a big, but the impact that that had on our community was profound. I should say the university is investigating the matter, so I don't have much more to report other than the fact that it is being investigated. And then the first day of classes, I mentioned earlier the Peabody Institute, students literally moving into their dorms saw a few swastikas etched on one of the walls leading to an elevator at the Peabody Institute, which is part of the Johns Hopkins system. So again, also a story out there, which in my 4 years at Hopkins, we never had to deal with anything like that. So I don't know if it's because people with such views did not express them, or I'm really not sure what prompted the individuals that engaged in such hateful acts to start. What I can tell you is that at those moments, it's very important to know who your partners are and what your goal is. And I must say that the university, especially with the Peabody incident, I received a note from the university president, a personal note, letting me know that the response will come. And I've worked directly with BJC as well. BJC is our Baltimore version to the JCRC, and we mobilized as a community, and the university addressed the Peabody situation. I think in a very serious way, in a very appropriate way, and really showed our students that they care about their safety, they care about them as people, and we also leverage is the wrong word here, but we also reached out to other groups on campus to build alliances, because the Jewish community is not the only community facing hate, facing bias, right? We have partners on campus that are not necessarily the administration or the provost office or the president's office. So I wanted to mention that. But we're definitely at Johns Hopkins seeing the uptick and responding to it. And I'll pause here because I wanna let my friends also share.
Just to underscore, Noam, what you're seeing is, you are seeing some of this anti-Semitism we're talking about, but you also felt the support of the university establishment, which is a very different story than the one that Rose Rich told at the University of Southern California.
Yes, and it's very important to note the community, the Jewish community, the associated, our federation, BJC, and national organizations such as the ADL. I've been in touch with the ADL on a weekly basis, so that's very important to note.
Okay. Tilly, do you want to jump in? Talk a little bit about what you're seeing at University of Michigan?
Yeah, it's interesting. I appreciated Aaron Lerner's comments earlier about where you'll be talking to a parent and someone will bring up something that happened on your campus 6 years ago. I think, I have a lot of empathy for our parents who are on this call and alums of our universities, because you hear the stories about the train wrecks, right? You hear the really challenging moments that we have on campus, and I imagine it's really painful for you, especially feeling like you don't know exactly what you can do, or looking at your university and thinking, how could this possibly happen? And I'll say that I think that anti-Semitism was on campus when you were on campus as well, and it just wasn't reported. And we are very blessed to have a network of organizations and to have a very empowered Jewish community that reports, because we know how important it is for us to talk about these issues. But I don't think that we have more anti-Semitism on our campus now. I think that I heard of one incident of Zoom bombing on our campus in this entire 11 months, and it wasn't a Jewish group, and it was randomly selected. And I think that in a country where we did see over the last several years a rise of white supremacy and white nationalism, I didn't feel that on campus, other than very minor isolated incidents that were clearly coming from outside of campus. I think that the anti-Israel realm on campus is much more complicated now than it has ever been before. And I think that it is very challenging for students to navigate what is anti-Semitism and what is not.
Right.
And I think that we're going to get there in terms of definitions and where does it cross over. And I think that's why I agree again with Aaron Lerner. These incidents happen, these situations of anti-Israel sentiment happen on a lot of campuses. And I would hate for any parents on this call to feel like, oh, I can't send my student to X university because there was an anti-Semitic incident I heard of there, or an anti-Israel incident that I heard of. I do believe that I'm seeing a lot more of a stronger response from universities in a lot of ways. I'd love to hear more about the USC situation you talked about with Rose Rich in terms of that response and talk about that. But I feel like when we have had incidents where the university feels like they can say something and do something, when it's a clear either violation of university policy or clear anti-Semitism, they can do something. We just have a very gray area of when anti-Israel crosses into anti-Semitism, and tremendous disagreements on our campuses and disagreements in our Jewish community of when that line is crossed and how to navigate that complexity right now.
So you're saying then that much of what we're seeing on college campuses is reflective of what we're seeing in the Jewish community at large, and the kinds of differences and challenges are the ones that are really part of the larger Jewish community, and they're simply part of the college campus world, and it's really not all that different.
Yes, I would say that, and I would also say that campus is a microcosm of what's going on in the broader community. So I do think that it is helpful to look at campuses to see a community where we're navigating these things, because I think that we are a signal to the broader community, to other institutions, of what is to come in terms of your future congregants. But I don't think that it differs so much.
So Erez, in this vein, we've been reading through the AJC study on anti-Semitism, which I'm sure you've all looked at. And one of the statistics in the AJC study was that an alarming number of Jews are hiding their whatever Jewish symbols they might be wearing, or not frequenting places that they might have frequented in the past, because there's this higher consciousness of rising anti-Semitism. Do you think that anti-Semitism is part of the consciousness of the University of Illinois and the student body?
Well, look, let me take a half step back to that question and touch on the hiding Jewish symbols, etc. I want to say that I think that all the examples that are going to be given here tonight or read in the papers tomorrow, or if you watch local news in Champaign, which most of you don't, will be told later on today. You'll see an event, right? You quoted 178 anti-Semitic events last year. There are 200,000 Jewish students on college campuses today, and that's less than one anti-Semitic event per 1,000 students. And so when we look at numbers, we don't really understand the repercussions of things. And I think anti-Semitism and assimilation, alluding to what Aaron said earlier, they are tied together. I think that when a freshman is moving to a dorm and in the elevator there's a swastika that's waiting for them, it sends a signal. And now the student can take a look at the swastika that was drawn in the elevator. Why was it drawn in the elevator? Because it was the only place in the building that didn't have cameras. And the guy that drew the swastika is a scaredy cat full of hate. That's really what's going on. There's some hateful person that their best way of expressing their hate is by drawing a swastika in the most unseen place that they can find. But for a freshman coming in for a new place for a first time to be on their own, they might not read it that way. They might say, "Oh, this place doesn't welcome Jews," and that's And that's where people start walking away. It's not the only place where people start walking away, but that's one of the places where people start walking away from expressing their identity. And similarly, we see it on the left side as well, where students are being asked to choose between their connection to Israel, which is part of their Jewish identity, and their commitment to social justice and human rights, which is also part of their Jewish identity. They could be in a situation where they're being asked to basically say, oh, maybe I should not highlight my Jewish identity altogether and stick to one or another.
Right.
And
so we're going to so that's a very and that creates a whole variety of issues for students. But before we get to that point, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit, or at least raise the question of the IHRA guidelines in terms of anti-Semitism. Is that something that Aaron Lerner, that you guys talk about on the West Coast?
So yeah, we do talk about that. And actually, I want to pick up on something that she said about colleges being sort of a predictor of the future. I actually am much more concerned about the fundamental attitudes that are changing in people's relationship to Israel, both the Jewish community and otherwise, than I am about the incidents. Right? The incidents are alarming. They're disgusting. They're gross. They're, they should not be happening on our campuses. But in the same way that Erez is thinking about the 200,000 students, or the multi-million number of students who are on college campuses today, I think about what Congress is going to look like in 10, 20, and 30 years. Mm-hmm. Because without American allyship, it looks totally different. And I'm not convinced that the work that we try to do sometimes by leveraging power with Holocaust definitions and the 3Ds, or with university administrators trying to put the screws on people who don't like Israel or don't like Jewish students. What's happening on the other side is way more organic than that. They are talking about values. They're talking about what Israel is. And at the moment, for a pretty large swath of both Jewish and non-Jewish students, Israel's just on the wrong side of the particular versus universal conversation. Right? For a lot of those students, they're thinking about humanity and Homo sapiens in the whole. And Israel wants to be a Jewish country. And those things are just not necessarily overlapping in the value system. So I saw a number of comments in the Q&A, like what can the state legislator do? What can the IHRA definitions and stuff? I don't actually think much of that matters when we're talking about hearts and minds.
It's interesting. One of the really interesting statistics that came up in the HAC study was how ineffective it is when Jews try to convince non-Jews of what anti-Semitism is. That nearly 2/3 of the respondents, 65%, said it would make no difference if a Jewish individual organization considered a statement or idea to be anti-Semitic. So in a very real way, this conversation isn't really taking place on college campuses the way that the Jewish community would like to think it should take place. And it puts, and that's challenging. So go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
And so, in some ways, we actually make it worse when we try to leverage power, because power is very out right now.
Right.
So, the people, when we talk about privilege and when we talk about whiteness and when we talk about, access to state legislators or to decision makers or, whatever, if that's how the Jewish community is trying to make change, it's going to alienate young people.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Can I just add to that for one moment? Because I'm really intrigued by what my colleague Aaron is saying here. And I think that it's an important thing for us to highlight in terms of I'm feeling the pressure as a Hillel director. When I see, Philip Stern's question, I think that it's a really important question. Should we be encourage, as a Hillel director, should we be encouraging our student governments to adopt the IHRA working definition? Should we be encouraging our universities to adopt? And I think that it's a real question about what's the intention behind it. And I think these definitions of anti-Semitism, and I say definitions because I think that there are many definitions. I think that they provide us with an educational tool. The IHRA definition was intended to be a working definition. And I think that where it adds value and where Hillel as an organization can bring it to campus is in bringing it as an educational tool to be able to engage and make sure that our universities are engaged in a conversation about anti-Semitism. But I fear that the conversation about IHRA, in particular coming from the outside of campus, that the intention is for it to be used as a way of policing campuses and policing speech on campuses. And as Aaron said, that if we as Jewish organizations on campus are putting it forward to be adopted as definitions, that the perception may be that it's intended for it to be adopted so that it is stifling others' speech on campus. And I'd rather use it as a tool than use it as a weapon in many ways. And my ultimate fear, what I'm really afraid of, is that we won't even know what IHRA means. We'll just know it as something that the Jewish students are trying to use their power to bring it to student government, to have it passed, that polices the language of other students on campus. We won't even know it as a positive tool of a definition of anti-Semitism. Just like when we talk about BDS, a lot of our students, they don't even know what BDS is. They just know it as an acronym that talks about something bad that they should be opposed to on campus. And so I worry about IHRA starting to develop a reputation, and I'm seeing it already, even amongst some of our more left-leaning Jewish students, of them feeling afraid that their language and their groups are going to be policed by this IHRA definition, and they're worried about whether there are going to be other students that are bringing it to campus. Now, that's just my campus, where it's a little bit more political. And it might be that on Aaron Weil's campus, that because there's an absence, that there's not the same level of anti-Semitism or sensitivity around these issues, it could be embraced in a totally different way. And that diversity still really needs to, the diversity of campuses really needs to be considered here.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating to me to hear us talking about the Jewish population, the Jewish community on campus are trying to bring something to help support their needs. But we're kind of okay with saying, with hearing people say, well, the Jews are bringing something to police us. When I don't think we would say this, we as Jews would say the same thing about other minority communities that are bringing in their needs to the table from their own perspective.
Do you think that the national Jewish community is too reactive to these issues? Go ahead, Aaron. You're nodding your head. Let's hear what you have to say.
Well, yeah, but I think I'm going to let Noam take this one, only because Noam knows this more personally right now than I do. Noam, the National Jewish Organizations, the Alphabet Soup, what role are they playing on a campus that you might be familiar with?
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Wow. I've been reflecting on what Aaron Lerner said earlier about power, and how the power dynamics on campus look very differently when you zoom out from campus, right? Who appreciates the leveraging power and who doesn't, right? So with the situations I've been dealing with, it's been national organizations, and it's been the Alumni Association, and it's been donors and alums that run the gamut. And then students, actually some students, I shouldn't generalize, but students really had a difficult time with what I was saying, saying these anti-Zionist statements are actually anti-Semitic. And I had a whole argument, and some students saw it as a freedom of speech issue. But you asked about national organization, so let me get back to national organization. The level of involvement, even the learning about the first incident, I learned from a national organization that was looking on Twitter and reporting it to me to do something about it, right? And then, okay, I work with the university. I want to go through the process. I want to make sure that I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's. And then I'm getting a little bit more pressure from another organization, and then another organization, and I'm intentional about not naming specific organizations, but there is a lot of pressure, and I should say that where I found support and calmness and some and more level-headed individuals was within the more established organizations and within our local community. So you'll always have those rogue organizations that are interested in whatever capital they can gain from their involvement. And they don't care about Hillel or you or your students. They just want to either get the national attention, media attention, fundraise around it, who knows. But I'm fortunate enough to say that we do have several organizations that are serious, supportive, that would engage your students in a meaningful way. The ADL, for example, offered tremendous resources to my students at Peabody that wanted to educate the community, wanted to build alliances, right? A swastika is not offensive only to Jews. It's right. It's not just about that. So they really offered to help and involved Hillel and my student leadership in the conversation. Whereas other organizations, and Aaron and I are friendly, yeah, they just charged in.
And yet Israel remains largely radioactive on most of your campuses. Is that a fair statement? Is on campuses where Apartheid Week is part of the kind of a calendar year of the campus, how does a student navigate Israel on a college campus when so much of the conversation about Israel appears to be negative?
So it starts.
One second. Go ahead, Aaron.
It starts with the fact that we don't wait for 1 week a year to program around Israel, and I think that's the core thing. Apartheid Week is a good title in the paper. It doesn't show the extent of the work that Hillels are doing day in and day out to make sure that we educate about Israel and about Jewish life and about why it's important to be a proud Jewish person and why it's important to continue to connect with your home congregation or a congregation that you've never heard about. And that's the day-to-day piece that a lot of people don't get to see just because it's not it doesn't sell in the papers. And so my thought as Noam was talking is I wish that parents and alumni would give as much attention and financial resources to Hillel as they're giving to national organizations that tell them that they'll fix campus life and the hate against Israel on campus. Because the only way that we will survive anti-Israel sentiments is with a really strong Jewish population on campus and a population that feels proud to celebrate their identity and hang around campus with their non-Jewish friends and talk about Jewish topics. And the only place that really promotes that on campus is Hillel.
rabbis are really great at giving Hillel's advice as to how they should handle things. Not that you may notice that. I'm sure this is a surprise to you. But if you were going to advise rabbis, congregational rabbis, as to how to prepare young people to go to college, what are some of the things that you would offer? Aaron Weil, let's start with you. And don't pass it off this time. You got to take the question.
Thanks, Rabbi. So first thing I would say to your previous point, though, there's probably north of 2,500 institutions of higher learning that are accredited in the United States. The numbers that are having significant, relentless, year after year, constant problems with anti-Israel activity are very, very small compared to the larger number. We in the Jewish community conflate it because, fear and organizational continuity. There's a lot of reasons why we put a light on that, and obviously we put a light on it because you can't give any support or allow anti-Semitic activity, and I would put anti-Israel activity in there. I think there are obvious differences, as Tilly pointed out. Not all anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, clearly. However, at least in my experience, I've seen it. The trend that scares me more over the years is how the other side has kind of figured that out. And so they've learned that if you do anti-Israel activity over here, it's going to be unaccepted. But if you do it over here, it's going to be okay. That blurring of the lines is something that kind of troubles me. But my advice to parents would be to understand that your kid's going to hear dirty Jew, and they're going to make it. They're okay. They're going to see a swastika, and they're going to survive the ordeal. They're going to hear that Israel did something that they're not comfortable with, and they're going to make it to the next meal, and they're going to grow from it. And they're either going to hate Israel or hate being Jewish, or they're going to ask questions, and they're going to kind of have that struggle and kind of figure it out. I mean, that's to me the purpose of Hillel. Someone said to me, describe the difference between Chabad and Hillel. And no disrespect to Chabad, but I say, if you're looking for an easy, digestible answer to complex questions, go to Chabad. But if you're looking for complex, difficult questions, come to Hillel. Because our job in Hillel is not to present you with a very clear cookie cutter Disney World view of things. Sorry, Orlando, that's our measuring stick. Our job is to make things complicated, because that is life. Life is complicated. Israel's complicated. Being Jewish is complicated. Being a part of a community is complicated. And so the more that we as Hillels can have the resources to kind of engage in those meaningful conversations, we're not going to, quote unquote, create a university environment as good as we have it at UCF, and we have it really, really good. We still have right now, as I speak, 2 armed guards in Kevlar vests outside of Hillel, because every event over 50 people now requires 2 armed guards in Central Florida because of security threats that we're dealing with, both from white supremacists as well as other, shall we say, general gun-related issues, not specific to the Jewish community. But that's a big problem. Now, we could also say, my God, with all the shooting going on in this country, aren't American college students of any particular color or creed having a challenge? And the answer to that is the same question. So I think parents should be talking to kids about proportionality and understanding that what you read in the news isn't necessarily an epidemic. It's just about that particular item. And to give them the courage and the confidence to know who they are. If the parents are doing their jobs of giving their kids the roots, we can help them and give them the wings.
Aaron Lerner, what would you add to that?
I want Jewish students who represent 2 categories. I want Jewish students who love Israel. And that love is organic. It's based on having traveled to the country. It's not based on all of the silly stuff that we talk about ICQ and cherry tomatoes and, that kind of stuff. It's based on having a Jewish homeland where we're, able to express the dreams of Zionism and live. And it's messy to run a country, but, I've been there. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've got Israeli relatives, whatever it may be, right? I want people who have that kind of deep connection. And I don't want them to hear the word Palestinian for the first time when they arrive on campus. Mm-hmm. I want them to be familiar with an authentic version of the Palestinian narrative so that they're not sold a bill of goods when they arrive on campus, or they don't get sucked into this narrative that, Israel bad, Palestinian good, right? So I want people to have, sort of real open, honest conversations, with folks. And I want students who can think. The students who are coming with their talking points are losing. The students who are coming and engaging in, thoughtful, empathic conversations are winning and, winning time and again.
Tilly, thank you for that.
Yeah, Rabbi Siegel, I want to assure you that you are not the only category out there that has advice for Hillel directors as to how to navigate Jewish life on campus.
Great relief to me. Thank you.
Yes, but I really appreciate the question, and I appreciate the answers from my colleagues so far. And in particular, Lerner, I would say that I want students who come to campus who are not surprised when they're exposed to the Palestinian narrative for the first time. And that means that our Jewish institutions, before not just looking at it at the media, but our Jewish institutions before they come to campus need to help our students understand that there is a Palestinian narrative, while they're also teaching our students a love for Israel and a relationship with Israel. So I want that complexity. I think where I differ slightly from my colleague Weil is that I'm not sure whether a student coming to campus is going to hear dirty Jew. But I do think a student coming to campus is going to have to navigate anti-Israel sentiments in some way and just make a decision for themselves how they do want to navigate that. And I think what is most important is that your students, either before they come to campus with their campus visit or right when they do come to campus, that they have somebody in Hillel that they know who they can go to. Because I have students who maybe I haven't spoken to them since they first arrived on campus and their parent dragged them to Hillel to have a conversation with me, but they have my cell phone number in their phone and I have their cell phone number. And when they're a junior in their second year and they experience something that made them feel uncomfortable on campus and they don't know how to navigate it, they know that they have my cell phone number and that they can reach out to me and that they can have a conversation with somebody who's going to help walk them through it. And just as I said before, that I think for all of you that anti-Semitism existed when you were on campus and it still exists today, I don't think anti-Semitism is going to go away. I think it's going to get more and more complex in the ways in which we're going to see it. And I think what's most important is that we don't make our students afraid that they're going to see it around every corner, but that they know that if they are in a situation where if they feel unsafe or even if they feel uncomfortable and they don't even know exactly what happened, but they know they want to talk to someone, that they have somebody in their Hillel that they can talk to. So even if they don't want to come, drag them to the Hillel in some way and make sure they get somebody's phone number in their phone so that they have that resource to be able to come back to at some point on campus.
Thank you. And so as we develop this conversation about the climate on campuses, we're happy to welcome someone well known to the Anshe Emet community, Rebecca Russo, who is the executive director of the Campus Climate Initiative at Hillel International. Rebecca, welcome. And why don't you talk for a minute about your work and what the CCI does?
Sure. First, I just want to say it's such a pleasure to be here tonight and to have my worlds collide in this way and to see, if not your faces of all of the Anshe Emet people who are here, to see your names on the participant list and just miss seeing all of you in person and hope we'll be able to return to that soon. But it's wonderful to be here tonight with my community and with my Hillel colleagues. And first off, I just want to say our Jewish college students are so truly fortunate to have the support of these Hillel directors and their amazing teams when they go to campus, and to have such rich and diverse opportunities to engage with Jewish life on their own terms during their college experience. As Tilly just said, especially when anti-Semitic incidents occur or other challenging experiences for these students, they are so fortunate to have Hillel as a place to go for support, to process their productive discomfort, to navigate challenging issues, and also to help them advocate for themselves when they've really experienced something that's anti-Semitic and problematic. And it's just such a blessing for our students to be able to have this kind of support structure when they go to campus, both for their positive exploration of their Jewish identity and for the challenging moments that they may encounter. So a little bit about my work. In addition to supporting local Hillels and working with local Hillels, Hillel International has more recently started working more proactively with campus administrators on these issues. And that's what the Campus Climate Initiative does. We started just this past summer, and we work in partnership with local Hillels with their campus administration to foster a positive campus climate for Jewish students. So while the role of Hillel is absolutely critical, the university also needs to be responsible and accountable for creating a positive campus climate and for making sure that our students, and of course all students of all various backgrounds, feel well supported on campus. And so we are working this year in our pilot year with a small group of universities where we're partnering in each campus with the local Hillel director and a few members of the campus administration to first assess and really better understand their current campus climate for Jewish students. How do Jewish students feel on campus and feel as Jews on campus? To learn about these topics together and to educate the administration about who Jewish students are and what anti-Semitism is and what Israel means in a Jewish context. There's so much opportunity for learning among campus administrators about who our community is and who our students are. So we really take an educational approach to this, and then working with administrators to take positive steps in terms of campus policies, in terms of educational programs, and really taking steps to make sure that their campus is a supportive place for our students as well as for all students. As Erez was saying before, this really resonated that Hillel is so uniquely positioned to work with the administration on these issues. And at Hillel International, we really work in partnership and support of the local Hillel directors because Hillel is part of campus life. It's not an outside organization coming in, but really part of the fabric of the university community. So that's what we're doing. I think these issues related to anti-Semitism in Israel are incredibly challenging. They're incredibly complex. And I think there are lots of ways through working with students and also working with the administration that we can move the needle and continue to improve the experience that our Jewish students have on campus. And so it's an honor to do that work and to do it with my Hillel colleagues here and elsewhere. And I'm glad to talk more with anyone in the community who's interested in learning more about what it's like on campuses and having a bird's eye view.
So Rebecca, how thank you for that. How receptive do you find the administrations on campuses to the work you're doing?
It's a great question. I have found so far that they are quite receptive to the work that we're doing, at least in theory. This year is a particularly challenging year to work with administrators on anything, given that many of them, especially in student affairs and student life, are wholly focused on COVID-19 and reopening and navigating all of that, in addition to, of course, navigating racial justice issues and other very important issues on campus. So it's a challenging time to engage university administrators on a topic. And I will say, I have found most of them to be quite receptive and quite open to learning more about these issues. And I think many of them have been really open with us about how little they know about Jewish issues. When they learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion in their higher education graduate programs, they're not learning about Jewish students and Judaism and what Israel means to Jewish students. They're not learning about anti-Semitism. This isn't part of what higher education professionals know a lot about. So I think I've been really impressed by the humility that I've seen by many of the administrators we're working with and their interest and openness to working on these issues. And it's, of course, challenging to navigate that among all the other priorities that they're dealing with right now.
So how do you respond to students who feel that they're not being well received in progressive audiences? If they come to campus and they want to get involved and they have imbibed the message of social justice, hopefully in part in their congregational life, and yet they feel some pushback. Rebecca, what's your advice? And I'm looking for others as well to jump in, but this seems to be part of the focus of your work. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of thoughts that I'm really interested in what the other colleagues on the call have to say about this. One is, I think relationships are so important, and this is really basic, but really foundational, that Jewish students need to build relationships with other identity groups, other religious groups, other cultural groups, get to know each other and build relationships on a personal level. Because when some of these challenges come up around inclusion in different groups and who belongs at the table and who doesn't, when we can build on relationships, that's really important. I think Jewish students also need to be comfortable showing up in other spaces and not always fronting our own issues, not fronting anti-Semitism. Certainly where there are cases where people say, if you're a Zionist, you can't be here, that's deeply problematic. But sometimes there are spaces where Jewish students bring their issues and say, well, they want to front that. And I think there are also spaces where we need to show up as Jews and say, our role here is to be allies and to focus on the other issues you're working on. And we may disagree about Israel-Palestine or other political issues, but I'm here as an ally to you in your community right now. So those are some thoughts. Really curious what other people think on this.
Anyone would care to add to that?
I'd love to add to that, Rebecca, and just say that I feel like I have Jewish students come to me who are afraid to enter into some of those spaces because of what they have heard. And what I say to them is that I really want them to enter into those social justice spaces with their full authentic self and to be able to share, not be afraid of expressing themselves as Jews in those spaces. And usually the students who are interested in those spaces are actually driven by their Jewish values, that they want to be in those social justice, anti-racism spaces, and that they are care passionately about those issues as Jews. And some of our Jews are Jews of color who care about those issues because they themselves are personally impacted. I think where I'm hearing Rebecca and I'm agreeing with her is that I think the difference is there's a difference between a student showing up in a space and bringing their full authentic self as a Jew and their Jewish values, and a student showing up in that space and wearing their Zionism on their sleeve because their Zionism is driving them to be in that space. Because then I would question whether their Zionism is driving them to be in that space because they perceive that space to be anti-Zionist and they want to bring their Zionism into that space. And then they're not there for the same reason as everybody else is there. They're there because they're concerned about the anti-Zionism in those spaces. And that's a whole other story. And I think with those students, it's very important for us to help them understand that that is how it's being perceived. That is why they want to enter into those spaces, and to help them find outlets for their Zionism through Hillel, through our Israel groups, through forms of advocacy, where we think that they will feel better about themselves as pro-Israel and Zionist students and feel like they're able to bring something to the campus environment on their terms, not in opposition to something else.
In Florida, we actually had the opposite kind of a scenario, which was culture shock coming from Pittsburgh, but social justice isn't really a big issue on universities in the state of Florida. It just doesn't rise, no matter which university, large, small, public, private, with very few exceptions, maybe New College in Tampa. But other than that, social justice isn't a driver. And in fact, in 2016, we actually had several students come to the Hillel saying that they didn't feel comfortable coming to Hillel because as Republicans, they felt unwelcome and unseen. And we had a real, kind of moment to look and say, okay, wait a minute, what is going on here? We're so used to saying, wait a minute, how are we including this group? How did we get to a place where this group doesn't feel welcome? We had to kind of think about what are the programs that we're doing? What are the conversations taking place in Hillel so that Jews who might have different political opinions can have those different political opinions, right? There's no one right opinion when you've got that many Jews, but how they can disagree without being disagreeable. And that was a real challenge to kind of give them a language, which they didn't, it's nothing that unfortunately, they weren't bringing from home. And it's something that they have to learn to navigate on campuses because, at least for the foreseeable future, this is the adult world that they're going to have to navigate. So why not learn it now in college through Hillel?
This has been an amazing conversation, and I want to end with a question that I would like each of you to answer. And before I get to the question, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for making the time to be with us. And the life choices that you've made are helping to shape an entire generation and multiple generations. And I do think that so much of the Jewish future, the American Jewish future, is in your hands and the hands of people who are doing the kind of work that you're doing. And so on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for the work that you do and for making the difference that you make. On your campus or in your work, what does success look like in 2021? From the Hillel perspective at the University of Illinois, for instance, what does success look like in 2021 Erez? You got to unmute your.
I will tell you, to me, it's not about 2021, it's about 2023. I can tell you what that will look like because we're going to have a large celebration. Look, we are, this is the long game. And I don't think that we are looking at year by year as a way of measuring success. We do, we say how many students have we engaged once, twice, 6 times, 12 times. We find ways to feel good about our work. What really feels good about our work, and I'll tell you that every time I walk into a room with other Hillel directors, I'm intimidated by the amazing people that I work with. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't do that much. But seeing my alumni get involved in Jewish leadership positions 2 years after, 5 years after, 10 years after they graduated, seeing them get involved in administrations, in the administration when a president gets turned over, seeing them getting involved in high-profile positions that make a difference in technology and bringing their Jewishness into it. That's what success looks like to me. And so I'm kind of half kidding about 2023 because to me, the centennial year of Hillel talks about not the past 100 years, but the next 100 years and the things that we're going to be achieving in a second century of an American Jewish community that has Hillels on so many campuses, empowering Jewish students to continue living a Jewish life, even in a century that's really decentralizes any organized identity. And that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to seeing how we're going to rise to that challenge and continue to create thriving Jewish adults and thriving Jewish communities all around the United States.
Thank you. Aaron Lerner, what would you add to that, or what would you suggest to us?
Survive with a little bit of thrive. This is, I don't think anybody can sugarcoat what's happening, in businesses and Hillels and synagogues right now. I think that we are incredibly important institutions on campus, and we should be investing in making sure that, Hillels and the other Jewish institutions that are going to serve our young people in 25 and 50 years, get through this and continue to establish their leadership pipelines. And then to the extent that we can get a little bit of thrive, and they're, great as well.
Tilly, why don't you tell us a success story for the University of Michigan from this year? What you would consider to be a success story?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking a lot about our success in answering your previous question. I'm thinking a lot about our success this year is a success that we were forced into, which is that we've actually been able to reach even more students with Shabbat dinner by handing them a meal and having them eat it in their home, or reimbursing them cooking themselves and really empowering them, than having them come to Hillel and have the meal at our Hillel. And I think that that feels successful, and it feels great that we've been able to support so many Jewish students this year in those ways. And what I want for 21 is very simply, I want to hug my students at the front of Hillel and welcome them to Shabbat dinner and have them pass by me and go inside, rather than hand them a meal and wish them Shabbat Shalom. That's really what I want. And the other thing where I want to see us successful now, and to build for success for us in the future, and quite frankly, for you, Rabbi Siegel, and your congregation in the future, in terms of us being an indication of where we're going. I feel like Hillel is still one of the only places where we're able to hold pluralism as broad as we can. And in particular in America today, that's really hard. That's really, really hard. And I feel us being strained by it all the time, and threats of, Jewish students never returning to Hillel or groups disbanding because they just can't handle what other groups are doing in our Hillel. And we are really just trying to hold them together and make sure that they stay in conversation with one another and respect one another. So my hope is that during this really hard time that we're in right now in America, that we can hold that pluralism so that in the future you can hold them as congregants and hold that pluralism as wide as you can in your community as well.
Thank you for that. Rebecca, is there anything you want to share with us as far as what success looks like from your perspective?
I agree with everything that's been said, and was really thinking about pluralism, building on what Tilly just said. Hillel is such a unique place in that it provides a space for pluralism, and I think especially around some of the challenging issues that we've talked about tonight related to Israel, related to anti-Semitism, that Hillel continues to grow in being a place where students can explore these topics with nuance and can show up with different perspectives on these topics and can inform the broader campus culture around these issues, that we can be a positive influencer on what can be a very toxic higher ed discourse these days around Black and white views on things, that we can be a contributor to a more positive and productive dialogue on campus. And as Tilly said, that we can also be a place to incubate leaders that will go out and model that kind of pluralism in their broader communities and in their Jewish communities when they graduate.
Thank you for that. Noam.
Yeah, I agree with everything my colleagues have said. Survive and thrive rings true to me, and I guess I want a little bit of maybe banality or boredom. I want to do just a Shabbat dinner with 150 students, and I want to be able to hug them. That's what. Everything else my colleagues have said is what I look forward to, and we work to build and support and nurture the future of the Jewish community here and elsewhere. So really, I just want to, a little bit bored. That's it.
Aaron, calling on you last because when we began our conversation, you talked about what you thought was the largest issue that you face, the most challenging, which is assimilation. So I wanted to give you a chance to touch on that and then to lead into what success looks like.
Sure. Well, actually, if I may, I almost want to do it the reverse way because one leads into the other. But
okay, please.
The success that I'm looking for this year is honestly to get back to Israel. When COVID broke out, we had more students signed up, Jewish and non-Jewish, to go to Israel than at any point since 1963 when the university was founded. And while everyone who knows me, I'm a pretty strong Uber Zionist. All the signs in the building are in Hebrew and English, Israeli flags at all the entrances, like the whole package. But that's not the reason why I want to get back to Israel. I want to get back to Israel for the benefit of the American Jewish community. And Tilly's here, so I mean that the North American Jewish community, including Canadians. The world has changed since 2010, and America is no longer the center of the Jewish world. And it's a reality that institutionally some organizations have gotten a hold of, but it hasn't yet taken hold, and it's going to take time to really absorb. But we're living in a time where I believe it's imperative for us to be able to convey to American Jewish college students the importance of Kol Aravim Zeh Lezeh, and for us to understand that reaching out, as we do incredibly in this country, to support many, many justified causes in this country that need our voice, that have an authentic Jewish voice historically, and that in the future will need our voice there because of our own existence, let alone our tradition, which compels us to stand up and not be silent in the face of these injustices. At the same time, those same Toranic callings are also beckoning us to look over at Israel and the Jews there. Yeah, as Rabbi Lerner said, the government can do things that drive us nuts. Lord knows it drives the Israelis nuts as well. But Israel is more than the sum total of its government. If we judge people by their governments, then America might not have looked so good for the last 2 years. Thank God people say, well, there's a difference between government and peoples. We need to teach this generation to understand that we're all in this together, because what's not going to stop, as Tilly pointed out, anti-Semitism isn't going anywhere. In 10, 15 years, someone's going to do something stupid in Israel, and that person's going to see it on the news here, and they're going to hold a kid accountable as they're walking across the campus in Ann Arbor and say, what did you do about this issue? And the kid has no idea what happened. We need to educate our kids to know about what Jewish tradition, to know Jewish ethics and morals, and to know how to apply it, not only in this country, but to understanding Jews around the world, because that to me is the critical point. In terms of assimilation, if we can't do that to a generation now where they estimate roughly 1 out of 2 Jewish college students comes from a home with 1 Jewish parent, intermarriage, in my opinion, is not the problem. Assimilation is the problem. I've seen plenty of kids come from homes where mom and dad is Jewish, and the kid's never going to walk inside of a Hillel or do anything. So it's not about your parentage. It's about it's not nature, it's nurture. And we have between, let's say, the equivalent of Calumet City and Kenosha. Okay, I'm using Chicago terms. In Florida, we have in that area from Miami to Boca Raton about 650,000 Jews. Massive, massive concentration of Jews, second only, I think, outside of New York. And yet the assimilation is so broad that the Jewish kids come to campus. Orlando, as an example, has a 2 to 3% community affiliation. If we can't reach these kids today, not about anti-Semitism, not be Jewish because there's people who will call you a dirty Jew, or not be Jewish because you should defend Israel. Be Jewish because that's your tradition. Be Jewish because there's a lot of people who when they understand what those traditions are, will actually take those values and go out into the world and improve their life and the life of others. And if we can bring that to our kids in this year and in the years to come, then we'll be doing a great work.
On that note, I want to thank each one of you for making the time for us tonight. And I want to thank everyone who was online for joining us. And let's go from strength to strength and out of COVID, God willing, soon. Be well, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for including me.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Go to.
And there we go. Good night.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.